Hi everyone, in today's video we will be doing a deep dive on how to perform an HR audit. If you watch this video till the end, I promise you that you will understand all the sub-processes in HR and will understand the key risks and be able to add great value to the client or company that you are auditing. So let's begin. Oftentimes the terms HR and payroll are used interchangeably, but they have different meanings. HR is the function that manages the employee life cycle. So right from the employee's recruitment, onboarding, training, development, performance management, as well as ultimately the exit or separation of the employee, all of this is taken care of by the HR department. Thus, the focus of HR is more on people management, on ensuring that there are right policies for development of employees, on ensuring that the employee records or master data is maintained properly. On the other hand, payroll is the function that is responsible for accurate computation of employee salaries and ensuring that the employees are paid on time. So now you see HR and payroll have distinct functions, and HR is the one that provides input data for payroll computation. So let's quickly look at the different processes within HR. So manpower planning is at a very high level, at a very strategic level. However, all the other sub-processes like recruitment, onboarding, and so on are more operational, and we will be covering what each of these sub-processes means, what are the risks, and how we can audit them. So the first sub-process that we have here is manpower planning. Now, this is a very collaborative effort between HR and various department heads and the finance team, and it is a very high-level strategic decision taken by the management. So different department heads will evaluate every year what would be the hiring needs. For example, is there going to be a project expansion which will require them to hire more, or is there going to be a new location, new office at a new location? So all of this will influence the kind of manpower that the company would need, the different departments would need, and all of this requirement is collated and then sent to HR, and the HR team will ultimately prepare and review the final manpower plan after consultation with finance team in terms of the budget or finance allocation available. So the key risks here are absence of manpower planning or inaccurate forecasting of the manpower needs, both of which could result in excessive hiring or unplanned hiring. And also another risk is absence of monitoring of the manpower plan that has been formulated, wherein the company will not know the actual hiring versus the budgeted or forecasted hiring. So as an auditor, what can you check? You can check who has prepared the manpower plan, whether it was duly signed off and approved, whether the assumptions involved in the manpower plan were reasonable considering the scope of business or the strategy or objectives of the business, and whether there's a process of comparing the actual hiring with the budgeted one. And all of this would help to assess the appropriateness of the manpower plan. So the next sub-process is recruitment. So what exactly happens here? So whenever there's a vacancy in any company, a formal job requisition is created and approved, and a job description is then finalized. The job is posted online on the careers website or on other platforms like LinkedIn and Naukri. Then the suitable candidates are shortlisted, they are interviewed, and once the final candidate is selected, an offer is rolled out to the candidate, and once the candidate accepts it, the candidate is formally recruited into the organization. So what are some of the key risks in recruitment? Firstly, unauthorized hiring. So if there's no formal requisition or no manpower planned or no tracking or mapping of the requisition against the budget, then it could result in unplanned, unauthorized hiring. Thereafter, it could be inadequate screening of the candidates or lack of background verification or poor background verification, both of which can affect the quality of candidates being hired. Next, there could be delayed hiring, either due to lack of raising the requisitions timely or lack of selecting the candidates properly. So this could impact operations of the company. Next, there could be a risk that the compensation offered to the candidates is not in line with the established policy. And lastly, there could be a risk of violation of privacy regulations. So let's understand how we can audit this. So firstly, when it comes to job requisitions, we need to check who is authorized to approve these and how is it ensured that there are no duplicate requisitions created for a single vacancy. Next, how do you ensure that the requisitions are created and approved timely? Also, when it comes to job descriptions, how is it ensured that these are accurate? Do they go through a multi-layer approval, or is there someone reviewing and signing off the JDs? And whether these requisitions are in line with the manpower budget that was in place, or if it is not budgeted for, is there an appropriate approval or justification for the excess hiring? Next, you can check whether the company follows fair hiring practices. So you can ask what is the screening criteria, how are the interviews conducted, and look for evidences of resumes of shortlisted candidates and interview evaluations of those candidates. It is quite important to have a well-defined screening criteria as well. For example, from my own experience, I know that in one of the organizations I worked in, there was an open vacancy for a senior manager, but the criteria was not defined. Candidates with experience ranging from as low as 6 years to as high as 18 years were being shortlisted for that position, and this unnecessarily creates roadblocks and confusion and delays in the recruitment process. So that is why it's important to have a well-defined screening criteria as well. Next, you can check for policy compliance, that is whether the recruitment process is in line with the policies defined in the organization, and the policies themselves have to be in line with the prevailing rules and regulations. For example, if an organization has a policy that it will give fair chance or equal opportunity to women candidates or candidates from neurodivergent backgrounds or having disabilities, then you can look for evidence to support this. That is, what is the organization doing to ensure recruitment across a diverse pool, or at least ensure that such candidates are not being barred from initial screening itself. Coming to background verification, you can ask for evidence to demonstrate the completion of appropriate background verification and whether this was done timely. Some big organizations outsource the service to external providers. So in that case, you can also ask for vendor monitoring. How is the organization or HR department ensuring that the vendor is providing adequate and timely background verification for the shortlisted candidates? Now next, with regards to offer letters, you can check whether the compensations in the offer are in line with the salary structure which is defined by the HR, and also check if it has been authorized and approved by the right personnel. For any organization, a rate of high offer letter rejections could indicate something is wrong. Either the candidates are not happy with the kind of compensation being offered, or it could also indicate inefficiency in the way the recruitment is being conducted. For example, I know from experience that one of the clients that I was covering, the background verification was done prior to rolling out the offer, and it would take the company a good 3-month period to just perform the background verification, during which the candidates would accept alternative offers, and hence there was a high rate of rejections. So this could be a kind of trend analysis that you can do to identify areas of improvement for the company. Lastly, the employee or candidate data is quite sensitive and is meant to be confidential, and that is why it is important to check the access restrictions are in place, which means that access to such data to the recruitment module must be only with authorized HR personnel. Also, you can check whether the candidates are informed and whether their consent is taken before collecting their personal information, and whether there's a retention policy that specifies how long this information will be stored and retained by the company, and you can check adherence to this policy as well. Now let's quickly touch upon HR policies and procedures. So when we are auditing this, we need to check whether these policies are authorized, whether they are duly circulated to the people, and whether training is provided to the staff to be able to adopt these policies and procedures in the day-to-day operations, and lastly whether these are periodically reviewed and updated. Now, this is already something we've also covered in our other how to audit series like the P2P audit. So if you've not watched that video, do check it out. Also, a key thing with regards to HR policies that you need to check is whether they are in line with the applicable labor laws or applicable regulations. For example, in India, we have the Maternity Benefit Act, which defines the maternity leave that must be granted to an employee. So when you're checking the leave policy, you can check whether the maternity leave is in line with the minimum leave that is specified in the Maternity Benefit Act. So this is how you can check whether the policies are in line with the rules and regulations that are prescribed. So the next process that we'll cover is onboarding. So what happens here? So this is when the employee formally joins the company. It involves collection of joining documents like bank details, ID proofs, education proofs from the employee, and generating the employee ID and giving system and access and IT assets to the employee, and also holding an induction or orientation for the employees. Now, some of the key risks here are if the HR fails to collect the documents from the employees, then it can result in inadequate record keeping. And other risks could be delayed onboarding, which impacts the employee engagement or employee morale. And lastly, system access is one of the most critical risks. We need to ensure that the system access is given on the date of joining to the employees, neither before nor after, because either way it could be risky. Early access could mean that the employee accesses organizational information even before joining, and delayed access could impact employee productivity. So as an auditor, you can check how are employee records collected, stored and archived, and how is it ensured that these are maintained confidentially. That is, the access should be restricted to the authorized personnel. You can check what are the controls to ensure timeliness of system access, and what are the controls to ensure that all employees mandatorily complete their onboarding training, how is the attendance tracked, what is the follow-up taken for delinquent employees, and whether any corrective action is taken for those who fail to complete the training. The next process is the employee master data management. Now, this is one of the most critical sub-processes because this feeds directly into payroll computation. So if there's an error or inaccuracy in the employee master data, then there is a probability that it can result in incorrect salary computation. So what does the employee master contain? The employee master contains all personal information about the employees, like their name, age, date of birth, and so on. It includes their contact details, their salary details. It also includes employment details like the date of joining, their designation, their team, their manager. It includes banking details, that is, which bank account is their salary payable to. It also includes work history, whether there's been any promotion or any internal mobility. And lastly, exit details if the employee has been terminated or has resigned. So some of the key risks in this process. Firstly, like we already said, if there's any inaccurate data, then it can impact the payroll computation. Second, there's a risk of unauthorized creation of employee records or unauthorized edit to the employee data. Third, it can result in creation of dummy records or ghost employees. Now, it's a very favorite interview question to ask. How can you check for ghost employees? And very soon we will see the answer to it as well. Fourth, there's a risk that there may be duplicate records, and this can result in excess payroll being processed. And lastly, there could be a failure to deactivate resigned employees, and this can result in those employees also appearing active in the master data. So now let's see what can you as an auditor check. So the first step in preventing any employee fraud is to ensure there's access restriction and SOD, or segregation of duties. So this means that the access to view and modify employee master data should be restricted to authorized HR personnel, and also there needs to be a maker checker. so that there is a 4-eye check. So whenever an employee record is being created or modified, it is going through a proper review mechanism. And also SOD, which is inherent because the HR department should not be allowed to process or pay salaries. So that is why there's a distinction between HR and payroll to avoid any fraud. Next, there must be a mechanism to record an audit trail or the history log, wherein it is evident who has modified the employee record and what field has been changed. To prevent the risk of duplicate employees, you can check if there are any preventive controls in place. For example, does the system trigger an automated prompt if a similar employee details are entered into the system? You can also take the employee master data and perform an independent analysis and look for similar names, email, or address, or the same PAN or Aadhaar or other identifier, or same bank account details to identify if there are any duplicates. Now, the most favorite question, how can you check ghost employees? So it is very simple. If there are no attendance records, no access logs, no logs of system logins, then it is clear that there is a risk of a ghost employee. You can also check if there is no manager or team mapped to an employee in the master data, or if they are missing identifiers like no PAN, no Aadhaar, or if the employee has been in existence in the company for a long time but has not gone through a performance appraisal, then these are some of the red flags which could indicate existence of ghost employees. You can also check if there's an automated control that deactivates an employee in the master data post their exit. And you can also check if there's a periodic review of the employee master data that is performed by HR to ensure that the data is consistent and accurate. So the next sub-process is attendance and leave management. Now this is also critical because it is another input that goes into the payroll computation, and if there's incorrect attendance or incorrect leave details, then it can impact the salary paid to the employee. So the key risks here could be incorrect attendance or falsification of attendance or leave records, or if there's excess or unapproved leave granted to an employee, or if this data is not automatically integrated with payroll, then it is prone to manual intervention and susceptible to errors. So as an auditor, you can check how is the attendance being recorded. If it is system based, say through biometrics or card based, then it is easy to simply extract the report and ensure that the report is complete and accurate. However, if it is manually recorded, then you need to understand what is the process for capturing attendance. Does the employee have to sign on any manual registers or need to fill up any timesheets to indicate that they are working on specified projects? And how is it ensured that these registers are accurate? Next, you can check for adherence to leave policy. So all the leaves are typically approved by the immediate reporting manager, or in some cases HR. So you need to ensure that the leaves are duly approved by the authorized personnel, and if there's any excess leave, then there is appropriate justification and approval for the same. And also check how are LOP days calculated and whether they are accurately being fed to payroll. So LOP is nothing but loss of pay. So this happens when an employee exhausts their leave balance and still need to take time off. So then for those days where they are taking the time off, they will not be eligible to be paid, and hence this needs to be fed correctly into the salary computation. Otherwise, it will result in overpayment to the employees. You can also reconcile the attendance records with the leave details to ensure that there is no understatement of leaves. Also, sometimes it happens that an employee may book the leave in the system but may not actually avail the leave, and thereafter may request for correction of such incorrect leaves. So you need to ensure that even the edits to the leaves are done by authorized personnel only. Also, if there's any policy that requires employees to be paid for overtime hours or penalizes them for coming late, Then you can check how is this data recorded, how is it ensured it is accurate, and then fed as input for payroll computation. So the next sub process is performance management. So this begins with goal setting or objective setting at the start of the year, wherein the key objectives and performance indicators for the employee are defined and agreed with their manager. And this is followed by a mid-year check-in and annual appraisal, which also includes manager and employee feedback, and finally granting the performance rating and deciding the salary increment. From a salary increment point of view, this is important because it is an input for payroll computation. So whenever there's a salary change, it needs to be incorporated in the master data and it has to be fed into the payroll as an input. Otherwise, it can result in incorrect computation of salary. However, from an HR viewpoint, the risks are more operational or administrative in nature, which could result in employee dissatisfaction, particularly if the performance reviews are unclear, if there's no consistent criteria, or if there's any bias, or if employees are erroneously skipped from the appraisal cycle. So as an auditor, you need to check whether the performance appraisal policy is clearly defined and specifies the cutoff date for eligibility, the timelines, as well as the criteria, and whether the appraisal itself goes through layers of review and approval and it covers all the eligible employees. You also need to check how is the salary increase communicated to the employees and how is it fed into payroll data. So the next sub process is training and development, and this is important to ensure that employees are compliant and also have opportunity to maximize their potential. So this includes assessment of training needs for different employees and finalizing the annual training calendar, and thereafter disseminating information about the trainings and tracking completion of the trainings. So the key risks here would be absence of relevant training, non-completion of trainings. So as an auditor, you can check whether relevant trainings are included in the training calendar. For example, typically all organizations will have various trainings on code of conduct, on compliance, on conflict of interest, and you can also check if trainings that are mandated by law are also provided to employees. For example, in India, it is essential that any company which employs 10 or more persons needs to train its employees on prevention of sexual harassment. So you need to ensure all the trainings are included. Next, you can check what are the processes in place to remind the employees to complete the trainings on time and what corrective action is taken against employees who fail to complete the trainings. So the last process is exit or separation management. This happens when an employee leaves the organization or is terminated from the organization. This includes conducting an exit interview to understand if the employee had any concerns during the employment, and also recovering any assets granted to the employees like laptops, phones, etc. The access of the employee to enter into the office premises or log in into their systems is terminated post their exit. Also, a full and final settlement is processed, which means all outstanding dues are paid to the employee. So the key risks here are absence of well-defined exit formalities or the employees continuing to access their systems even after their exit. Another key risk is incorrect computation of full and final settlement, but this is more of a payroll risk rather than an HR risk. As an auditor, you can check if there's a formal process to conduct exit interviews and look for evidence to support the same. Next, you can look for no due clearances handed over by the employee prior to the exit. This is basically certifying that the employees have handed over their assets and there is no outstanding due payable by the employee to the company. Based on resignations and terminations during the audit period, you can check whether the access for these employees was revoked timely and whether employee master was duly updated on time. Also, you can check how is it ensured that the HR submits details of resigned employees timely to the payroll department so that accurate details are available with the payroll team for processing full and final settlements. And lastly, you can also investigate into reasons for high employee turnover, and this would help to identify any underlying red flags and is more of a point to improve efficiency within the company. Now, moving on to payroll, these are the various sub-processes which are part of the payroll function. So at the start of the video, we covered how HR and payroll are two different functions. And now we will move on to understand each of these sub-processes, what it means, what are the key risks, and how you can audit them. But for that, you need to subscribe because that will be covered in a later video. So don't forget to subscribe so that you can stay updated on the next videos in this series.